Welcome back, everyone in the Zoom room. If you're around, we're going to get started. For the last couple of hours, we're kind of just going to go over more resources and logistical things about collaborations and partnerships. Feel free to, raise your hand and so that way we can unmute ourselves over here and hear what you have to say. And yeah, we're just going to get into it. So we left off, I believe, on our mission statement and talking about the importance of getting all that together before you go off to begin any sort of seeking like funding or partnership or things like that. It's important to have all those ideas pretty articulated before you go into these partnerships and relationships. So I chose this card because this is the card, 5 of Wands is the card of conflict. So you can see in the card, all the different figures are kind of battling to be heard and seen. And this kind of makes me think about how we might feel sometimes in different experiences with other people in trying to get a project off the ground. Like everyone has their own ideas. Everyone has like their idea of like what the vision is, what the goal is. And maybe sometimes no one listens to each other. Everyone's just kind of like in their own world. But we want to avoid all of that, or at least diminish like that likelihood from happening or starting off those relationships and those collaborations without that idea. And a lot of that comes from the idea of like deep listening and being able to understand, like really hear the people that you're working with, to respond rather than react to their ideas and opinions, to build upon them, to use more I statements, less like we generalization statements, speak from your own space, give other people time to speak as well and to hear what they have to say. So yeah, these things kind of all contribute to the roles and realities of partnerships and collaborations. This is and goes hand in hand with essential documents. So what things to think about, like what are the specific tasks that you will be responsible for within this project? And the conscious input and output of energy, effort, and time, personally and as a collective. So we were talking a little bit before lunch about maintaining your energy, like maintaining your own sense of making sure your own basic needs are met before you're giving of yourself to other people or projects. You want to make sure that you're taken care of first. So it's kind of like if you don't have any food and you want to help someone else eat, you can't really do that because you need to like feed yourself before you're able, or like the airplane. Yeah, the airplane adage of put your own mask on first, then help your other passenger next to you. So yeah, thinking about within the projects we were discussing earlier, what are those specific tasks you will be focusing on in those instances? And a way to get that across and like kind of keep thinking about how we want to be transparent and establish a better communication with our partners is through, one way of doing that is through like a memorandum of understanding, which kind of outlines the expectations on each party's side, like what each party is expected to bring to the table, what their roles are, what outcomes or products they're trying to put out there, and who's responsible for what. And you can get really clear with these documents. It's very important, like if you are going into these partnerships, to kind of to draft something like this, so that way everyone is on the same page of what is expected from one another, and no one's like assuming that someone will pick up the slack or someone's supposed to do this and it wasn't me, sort of thing. Like it's very important to stay very transparent, open. And the good thing about these memorandums of understanding, they can always be adjusted. They're not like set in stone. It's just something to get you started, and you can always adjust later on if the project needs to be reassessed or your role needs to be reassessed. And you can always take that step back and be like, okay, well, I said I wanted to do this, but actually I think I only have the capacity to do this A, B, and C instead of D, sort of thing. And that can always be rewritten and renegotiated. Another essential document that's really helpful to have in these types of collaborations are the deeds of gift and donor agreements in terms of archival materials. So those things are mostly for individuals who are bringing materials to the collection to be preserved and digitized. They outline a deed of gift outlines like the parameters around what is being brought to the collection, and giving kind of like a detailed list of like what all those items are. And then the donor agreement is between the archive itself or the organization and the individual who's bringing in those assets, whether that be a oral history, home movies, photographs, documents, things like that. And that agreement can be tailored to however you see fit, between however you wish to pursue the copyright information or ownership of these materials after, some people pass, or if they are brought by an estate, like a family estate. You can kind of tailor them to those specific instances. And the last one is a conflict of interest policy. And these are just like 4 major ones. There's more documents, I'm sure, that we'll talk about later. Conflict of interest policy, which is something that Snowden brought to my attention a few days ago, is like, if you're working with like an organization, and kind of like what we did with the Y2K project in Center for Home Movies, like we had to be very specific about our role in the MOU, because we couldn't cater just to this project or like bar people from using certain home movies in our database or through our collection because it's being used in a film, sort of thing. So we had to make sure that that our role wasn't in conflict of interest of the organization's values and mission statement. So that's something that we can draft up in order to look back on and be like, okay, yes, this was in compliance with what we believe in running our organization. So these are some, essential documents, which we'll get into soon. But now we're going to kind of go into like funding and budgets and stuff like that, and ways that to kind of start thinking about how these projects, especially in like the earlier stages, the stages that you're just starting to put things together. Maybe you've been doing some work on your own for a while and you're like, okay, I really want to get some help to bring people on and also get myself compensated, in the sense that I need to sustain my own livelihood. So to do this work, I do need to be compensated for it. So different ways to go about it. There's how many of us in here have been a grant writer, done grant writing before? Everyone? Ocean, have you done any? No? Okay, cool. Then this will be very helpful for you. Grant writing is, yes. Yeah, exactly. Okay. I've been applying for grants for a very long time as a filmmaker. Never received anything as a filmmaker, but once I started with ENTRE and started applying for grants for ENTRE, it's become a little bit easier to get past like some barriers that I was seeing with my own personal work. And I think a lot of that comes with just experience, like just writing grants over and over and over about the same project. You start to like tailor your project a bit more. You start to understand what you're trying to do more. You start to be able to articulate more the important things that you need to talk about within the project. And also it kind of gives you a better idea of how to think about your project. If you're not thinking about it, maybe you're thinking about it in one way and an application asks you to focus on certain aspects of it. And you're like, oh yeah, I never thought about how it can affect it in these areas, sort of thing. So there's a lot of intellectual labor behind it, a lot of energy, input and output, for not just from yourself, but those people that you're collaborating with. If it is a collaborative application, there's a lot of different types of grants too. So for people who aren't a nonprofit organization or institution of learning, there's something called fiscal sponsorship. A lot of grants will only disperse funds to organizations who are nonprofits, 501c3 status, or some sort of university setting. And unfortunately, like for ENTRE, we're a worker-run cooperative, so we avoid the nonprofit world due to our values of not having a hierarchical organization structure. But that bars us from applying for these larger federal grants because we're not a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So, but that doesn't mean we can't apply for them in partnership with other organizations that can act as a fiscal sponsor. One of those organizations is AMIA, the Association of Moving Image Archivists. They offer fiscal sponsorship for projects. So if there's something that there's a grant that you're looking at and it relates to the archival world and the importance of preserving audiovisual material in different cultural contexts, AMIA would be a place that you can seek that funding help. Other like local organizations as well that are nonprofits can also act as fiscal sponsors, and that's where you can kind of get a little creative. Like they don't have to be academic institutions or these organizations that focus mostly on archives. Like you can go beyond that. For us at ENTRE, what we have explored is one of the they're a nonprofit. They're called Trucha, and they are a media organization based in the Rio Grande Valley. They do a lot of journalism around media that's not covered but stories that are not covered by local media. They do art workshops. They do a bunch of different things, but they are a 501c3. So, and we've forged a relationship between our organizations so that way in the future, if we wanted to apply for funding, we can have them come on board as our fiscal sponsor. So just like finding ways to get hyper local in your community with organizations that support your project or like are in alignment. That's really important. The things that are aligned with your project's mission, your value system. Those are really great opportunities to find a fiscal sponsor for these grant applications. And then universities as well at times can offer fiscal sponsorship. Right now, I am a fellow at the Insight Department at Columbia University. It's called the Assembling Voices Fellowship, and they kind of support projects that are doing work in the social justice area and trying to make our world a more equitable, democratic, work towards a more equitable and democratic society. And when I was just there in February, I had a meeting with one of the staff over there who kind of runs or like helps the fellows kind of explore scalability and funding for their project. And when I mentioned like, hey, we'd love to like go for these like NEH grants and stuff like that, but we're not a nonprofit and don't intend to be one, like what can Columbia do to help me, sort of thing. And then they're like, yeah, we can work together and Columbia can act as your fiscal sponsor, primary applicant, and there'd be the sub-awardee. And so right now we're working on an application for the NEH, which is done in that style where we partner together. ENTRE team, myself, Andres, and our grant writer, Fabian, all worked together on our proposal, sent it to the Columbia team. They gave us feedback. We rewrote it. And it's all about like kind of the way they structure the language. They have a whole grant team in their department. So it was just about us making sure that our project was fully fleshed out in the way we wanted to see it. And then they gave us some pointers on how to like kind of maneuver it so that it made sense for the partnership to happen and things like that. And they also like went in and did their own edits and things like that. So it was a very collaborative process on that application, which is important because those applications are humongous and tedious, and it's important to have support in different areas. Like Fabian, our grant writer, comes from an economy background, so he came in with a lot of like data and information about our region statistically. That was in relationship with that was aligned with the grant application requirement of talking about climate change and COVID-19 effects on our region. So we had Fabian kind of do that research, pull that information, those citations and things, maps, any sort of media that we needed for the application. He had his own section that they were like kind of fleshing out. I was more like vision, bigger picture. Andres is a very good writer as well. And so we both kind of just went through those like different sections together. And yeah, and it's been a long process. We've been working on this for the past 2 months. So we're almost at the final stretch. It's due on the 16th. So we're almost there. But yeah, that required a lot of collaborative effort, and not only between us and Insight, but also people that we have been collaborating with in the Valley. So we needed to submit letters of support or letters of commitment to the project. So Monica Sosa, the person who brought the Boca Chica Corazón Grande project to us, wrote a letter of commitment for us to show that she is committed to working on this project with us, and that she has been doing it since the beginning. Letters of support right now, we've sent some requests to like the Texas Archive of Moving Image and the Texas Museum of South Texas History, both of which we have collaborative relationships with right now. So those are ideas like of how vast the web can get sometimes with these types of applications. So yeah, the different grants and fellowships, I'll just kind of go through them. I'll give you some. So I just talked about the government grant, the NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities. There's artistic grants, which Ocean, you might be interested in this. There's one called the Mid-America Arts Alliance, and that's the grant that was given to me. It's very specific for Mid-America, so Texas was right in there. But what it allowed me to see ENTRE was as a social practice art project. I applied as a fellow because I felt like ENTRE's mission was aligned with what the grant and the fellowship was asking for, the requirements, and it introduced me to this concept of social practice as an artist, and how ENTRE plays into that role. So you can get like funding through being a solo artist, doing these things. There's another grant that just came out last year called the Constellations Fellowship Grant, and that one was super. One of my friends and artists from the Rio Grande Valley, Nancy Guerabara, actually was a recipient of this grant this year. They give you a salary of $80,000 for like 18 months and health insurance, like all this stuff, so you can just fully focus on doing your project and meeting with the fellows and stuff like that. So there are creative ways in the artistic realm, especially if you're coming from like experimental film stuff backgrounds. Definitely I didn't put this on here, but I'll put it in the resource and I'll tell you right now. It's called This Week in Experimental. I don't know if you follow that account on Instagram, but what they do, and they send out a newsletter every week. And it lists it lists funding opportunities, emergency grants, like film festival submissions, like what's coming up. And that's where I found the Mid-America Arts Alliance grant. So I'm always looking through that every week to see if anything fits into what I'm doing personally as an artist, or something that ENTRE is wanting to pursue, either as like an organization or a specific project. So that's a really helpful, definitely artistic grants. You can, especially if you're doing this on your own for a bit, like that's a way to like kind of fund yourself in the work. So you can get money for that project. And then academic fellowships, like I just mentioned, the Assembling Voices at Insight. That one is another good one. They're going to go into their 3rd year of doing it this year. So I'm hoping that they continue it on. It's been a really wonderful experience. It's only been 3 fellows each year. So it's just supplementary income for the fellow themselves to use however they see fit, whether that's for pay their rent, just living expenses basically. And then you get an additional $5,000. It was $20K and then $5,000 for additional project support. And then you get meetings with the different staff at Columbia to help you you want to take as much advantage of all what they offer to you in these fellowships, because it's about the connections you're making with these different facilitators, the artist facilitators, or people that are in that department. You want to forge those connections. You want to connect with people that align with what you're trying to do and what your goals are for your own work personally, and like what your work you're doing, you're in the organization you're a part of. So yeah, and then academic, there's also, I think fellowships are a wonderful way to pursue this type of work as an individual that's outside of an organization. Even if you are in an org, fellowships kind of help supplement that and give you like a more structured time period to focus on specific projects and give you the support around that through staff and resources, and just offering honestly connections. They're just like, whoever you want to meet, let us know. Like, you know, with the Columbia thing, they're like, anyone at Columbia you want to talk to, let us know. Like, we can put you in touch, you know. And so that opens up a lot of doors and also a lot of ideas as to how to expand the project. And it doesn't mean that you have to scale up and become this huge organization. Like, we're not in any way trying to do that, but it's about like the further reach and like who else can we connect with that believes in what we're doing, and maybe they lead us to other things that could, you know, it's just like this like little constellation map of individuals and organizations and opportunities. And I chose the Ace of Pentacles, obviously, because it's the beginning of the Pentacle Suite. So it's like an opportunity coming out of the ether, right, to offer you this financial abundance, this material abundance, to fund the project, to give you that like basic, those things that we need to live, you know, like food, shelter, health, you know, these basic needs that need to be, unfortunately, in this society, used. Money has to play a role. So this is a really great way of looking at how to explore funding. I know the EMEA, if you're an EMEA member, you become part of the listserv on EMEA, and there's always stuff being posted there as well, fellowship opportunities, grants, things like that. So those are great places to seek this type of funding. Also, Creative Capital, I believe, is an artistic grant. Also always puts out, once you're on their list, they send you out like a list of happenings every 2 months. And so you can see what grant application deadlines, fellowships, stuff like that are coming up, and see if anything aligns with you. I'm always looking through those types of newsletter lists, and then I'll end up even sending people that I know in the like Valley. I'm like, oh yeah, you're doing this project, you should probably apply for this because it sounds like something right up your alley. You know, like, it's really important to pass stuff along too. I really highly believe in karma and like that boomerang effect of what you put out comes back to you. So I'm always passing on stuff that I know that it doesn't fit my like practice, but it sounds like a dope opportunity and I want someone to take it. And it'd be cool if someone from the Valley got it, you know, like, so I'm always trying to like push stuff around to other artists and encourage them to apply, especially if they don't feel like they're really the artist yet. Like, I'm like, no, you can do this, you know, and encouraging people. And I feel like that energy really does like come back to you. And I feel like that's why we've been able to be so fortunate in getting some funding through different orgs, because we have been like constantly giving out, you know, or giving back to our community through either giving opportunities away or giving opportunities to other people or commissioning people to do work for us.
You're building social capital.
Exactly.
Right. You put in the bank, you get to take out from the bank, but it's not always the same account, right?
Yes.
Like, when you give, it doesn't always come back to you in the same form. And
exactly.
Something I always have to keep in mind, because I think often, and forgive me for breaking in here, but one thing that I have to try to remind myself of all the time is that you give what you can, so you get what you need. Because often one of the things we think about as organizations is volunteer time and energy, and we think of that as just being a one-way street, but volunteers get something from that experience. They get a sense of belonging, connection, a sense of ownership. And so I've thought a lot in in various projects over the years about how to enhance that sense of ownership. So one thing I've talked about is like, it was really hot for a while to talk about crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing, that was like the thing. I talked about club sourcing. Like, let's leverage specialized knowledge and people's unique enthusiasms for things, and say, like, you know, we're not gonna just ask anyone and everyone. We're gonna ask the people who actually really know something about this, and we're gonna recognize their knowledge and expertise. We're going to ask them specifically to help us out with this. And maybe what we give in exchange is increased access to collections that would otherwise be, non-public, or we can offer, membership or something that is, like enhances that sense of belonging, and gives us a way to acknowledge the contribution and not be extractive. But also say, like, you are the people who know the most. Like, we don't actually know very much about this, and you do, and that is meaningful to us, and we want to make sure that that you feel rewarded in if not in kind, then at least in proportion to your efforts.
And thinking about going back to our mission statement, being able to talk to people that you think would be, people who may know more about specific areas that maybe you need more help in, being able to have that mission statement to reach out to them, or that outline of your project's ideas and goals, is super important, especially and you can refine it as you go and do these applications, but you can always, like Snowden just mentioned, just reach out to people. You never know what might come from an email to an organization that maybe aligns with your project's mission, or has a specialized skill set or knowledge source about something within your project that you may not have access to. I mentioned earlier, for us, what we're doing is, I mentioned that we're able to digitize VHS, mini DV, Betamax, and I think high 8 soon, but we can't digitize any Super 8, 16, or regular 8 film. So what we've been talking about with the Texas Archive of Moving Image is to partner with them and to offer in-kind services to us to get those film elements transferred digitally for us, in return of developing a type of donor agreement, which allows those home movies to be part of their Texas Home Movie Roundup page, so that they don't necessarily have to be public access on their end, but they want to be included in their collection. And obviously that's up to the donor, whether they want to opt into that or not, but that's an option for us. And that's a partnership that we've made that it helps us, especially when applying for grants, being hey, we have this much of in-kind services given to us from Tammy, because we've created that partnership already. And they have an asset like a scan station that we don't have, too expensive for us to have on our own. So they are offering that service for us in order to continue to grow our archive, and in exchange give them access to some of these films. Obviously all that is dependent on what your donor agreement and what your donors want, but that's a stipulation that could happen, and exciting that we're able to find that way of collaborating. And then so funding leads to budgets, the thing that we all don't want to talk about, but we have to. We all want to talk about money, but no one really talks about money, but we will talk about it right now. Budgets for me, the budget has its own narrative, right? So when you break down a budget, you can see where the money is going. And when you look at your project proposal and look at your budget, they're speaking to each other, and you're allotting the numbers are important, especially in terms of compensation for people, resources, things like that. It shows where your values lie, right? So for us, what we believe in is equity budgeting, making sure that everyone gets paid if they're helping us out. Everyone's putting in time, energy, effort. A lot of people have opted out and said, whatever you're going to pay me, I would rather you donate it to so-and-so organization, or whatever, I would rather just do this. I would, that's fine. That's something that they say, but we are always you're going to get this much, even if it's just a $50 programming fee, that's what we can offer for you to program. And then you'll get 50% of the door if we sell tickets to an event, sort of thing. So we're very upfront, making sure that everyone is taken care of in a way that where we can sustain our own organization's overhead, but also contribute into our community by paying the people that are helping us build this organization together. So equity budgeting holds that the chief space of praxis and ethics for any community-based cultural work is budget. Equity budgeting, in short, is the basic radical commitment to pay everybody. A lot of people in archives don't think that donors and oral history narrators should get paid because it might alter the type of material that you're gathering, right? The documentation. But we believe, and a lot of people believe, and I've linked this in this manifesto, the equity and budgeting manifesto in the resources, that isn't the case, then we need to change that narrative. Obviously, like what we were talking about earlier about people not having capacity because there's other things going on in their lives, you know, they're facing maybe the possibility of houselessness because of displacement. They don't have time to like just be not like, you know, free time to like give to you because of this. But if you're offering an honorarium or something, gives them, you know, shows them that you value their time and you understand that they can't probably do this, but this is what I can offer in exchange. And I respect you and I respect our relationship. And I want to make sure that you're feeling safe and taken care of, you know? So yeah, accountability is a big thing. We talked about that earlier, being transparent with the partners, just whoever you're working with, making sure that you, you know, outline what money you have for the event or the project and how it's going to be dispersed, things like that, sharing and or developing a system of tracking funds together. So making sure everyone knows where the money's going, especially within the organization. If you all are organizing together, sometimes it's just like a few people who kind of keep look over the budget and stuff. But for us at ENTRE, since we all kind of work together, we're very transparent with where all our money's going. So we're like, okay, we had this much from this grant for programming, so that's staying there, but this much of it needs to go to taxes, so let's move that over, you know. So we talk about all of that stuff, and we have our own system. Deal memos are super important. I learned this as a freelancer, as a freelance colorist, like not getting screwed over in jobs, like developing a sort of deal memo that outlines what your payment is, when you expect to receive it, what you're delivering in return, blah, 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 blah. And you can do that for not just the partnerships that you create, but also your contractors that you hire to work with, like whether that's someone that's going to document your event for the evening. You want to make a deal memo that says, that's what we do. So we hire a photographer to document one of our screening series or something. And we outline how much they're going to get paid for, when the event is, how many hours they're working, and what we expect them to deliver in turn before we give them their payment. So like, we're like, oh, just, you know, in the next, after, you know, by this date, we would like to have the photos delivered, and you will receive payment once the photos are delivered. So everyone's it's very clear as to like what to expect. So people know, okay, and this is what they're holding me to. And we ask them to sign it and send it back to us. So we have a record of all of that in our end, just to make sure that it's not only for our sake, but for the person that we're working with too, so that they know that we value their time, we value their effort, that we're putting this into writing. So that way we're both in agreement of what we're asking you, and we're not going to ask more of them than what's outside of what's in the deal memo, right? That would be a separate ask and probably more money, you know, so, which we'd be happy to do. It's just, you know, adding on a different memo. And so organization, within all of that, organization is so important. You can either do this with QuickBooks, Airtable is a favorite of a lot of people. We love Airtable, Google Sheets or Google Docs, and bank account buckets. Like, it's super important when you have your organization or your project, like, to see your account in different ways. Some accounts, like personally, I bank with Ally, which is an online bank, and you're able to make different buckets or different savings buckets so you can meet certain goals and stuff like that. For us at ENTRE, we bank with the Security Service Federal Credit Union, and we're not allowed to really make buckets, but we open separate checking accounts. So one's just for operational costs, like our own monthly salaries, our rent, subscription services, things like that need to be on all the time. And we have that number in our head, what we know we need to have every month, sort of thing. And then we have a separate account for when the grants come in and we start okay, this is for programming or this is for workshops. And those numbers are really taken care of in our table, allotting, okay, we received this much from NALOC, $10,000 from NALOC, 7,000 of that goes to programming ideas and workshop commissions. And 3,000 of that goes to the government. So we had to move that to our savings account. So when tax season comes around, we have that set aside and it's ready to go. So those are ways to like kind of stay organized logistically with the money.
Which is so important.
And so it's very important. Yeah. And it can take some time to get used to talking about this stuff with your collaborators and things like that. Because we're, like we said earlier, like our society doesn't support talking about money or like how to manage your money. Like we're not given any sort of like financial literacy course in high school or anything like that. So a lot of people enter the workforce with like no idea about like pay, especially if you're a freelancer, what that entails. If you just go into and you're like, oh, I'll just, make some money on the side. And then you're like, oh, whoa, I owe all this money in taxes, like I didn't know. So it's very important to start like really making that a normal thing for us. And I think to do that within our organizing of project building and things like that is a great way to start. And just to be comfortable with talking about stuff like that. Equity budgeting is another term that came up, and it holds at the oh, no, sorry, not equity, participatory budgeting is when the community members directly decide how public funds are used. So it's another way of democratically and like managing money for a community project or things like that. So those are ways to think about how we can be more equitable and aware and transparent of how this money is being spent. I chose the Four of Pentacles because, as you can see, this means this person has kind of a grasp on their material possessions and knows where everything is at all times. So this is an important like archetype to work towards, to like protect and also just be more conscious of like where those material assets are going. Does anyone have any thoughts or shares about budgeting or grants right now?
I'll share something with the folks who are here and with the folks who are participating via chat, with the request that it be removed from the recording. And I would invite those all of you who are participating to do the same. If there's discussions you want to have that you would prefer remain within this virtual room, that's completely acceptable. I recently worked on a project with a private collector where I assisted them in applying for grant funding from a source that actually does provide grants to individuals and not just nonprofits and institutions. And it was for the grant source provides funding to individuals for preservation planning grants, where you can pay a consultant to come and do an assessment of your collection and make recommendations, with the idea that the next step is you apply for a larger preservation implementation grant to carry out the recommendations from the assessment. I invested that time upfront, sort of on a pro bono basis, knowing that I would be able to do the work and get paid with the grant funds that I was helping them apply for. So that would also, it would benefit the collector, whose collection is significant, important, and like very much at risk and in need. And this, as an individual, this is not somebody who had experience writing a grant, so that I was bringing skills and knowledge to the table. I took their sort of their draft, which was really more of a sort of description and a sort of like sales pitch. Like my collection is really amazing, but it wasn't like there wasn't a budget, there was no plan. And then we got the funding, and I carried out the work with the understanding that, as with other grant projects and programs that provide funding for services, that I worked on, like National Film Preservation Foundation, which pays for film preservation funding, and they just pay the lab that does the preservation work directly. And the owning institution that has the film materials gets the benefit of the preserved work, but they don't ever have to handle any of the money. I assumed that I would just be invoicing the funder at the end of the project when I submitted the final report and summary document from the grant, but it turned out that the check had gone directly to the collector, and they were, in dire financial straits, living out of their car, spent the money and let me do the work, and then only afterwards told me that they couldn't pay me right away or really at all. And so that, the question of like where does the money come from? In what form does it get delivered, and how do the people involved get paid, and what are your responsibilities and obligations? And I really think that this person just did not understand the nature of grant making. But it ended up, I ended up basically like out $5,000 for, not getting paid for work that I had done. And not really nobody was in a great position. The funder doesn't want to go after a destitute collector for money, even though legally they have every right to do so. The collector signed an agreement saying that they were going to spend that money in a certain way. I don't want to go after this person but I do feel like I deserve to get paid for my work. But I also don't want to hand over a final report to a client that hasn't paid me and probably won't be able to pay me. So it's a tough position, and I feel like if I had, I don't honestly know what I would do differently. I definitely spoke to the funder and said, nothing for nothing, but going forward, maybe some controls in place, where you do things more like this other grant program does things, would prevent this from happening. But I can easily imagine it's not just an individual issue, it's an institutional issue too. I can easily manage a small cash-strapped organization just not being great about keeping track of money if it all goes into one account, and then getting to the end of the fiscal year and realizing that we have a big electric bill coming, and so we can't pay our instructors, or we thought we still had that money, but we already spent it. Just the idea that it's not that $100, it's this $100. Physically separating those things can be really essential, and escrowing funds that are committed elsewhere, especially if you're a small organization, or if every penny matters. Keeping track of that money is really important, and it's the kind of thing that can really scuttle a collaboration. I had really hoped to have a long-term relationship with this collector. I really care about their materials and about them as a person, but I also feel cheated. And it's really hard having conversations even by email with this person, because they just don't get it. They feel like they've been taken for a ride, and that I think they always thought that this was going to be money to support them in their collecting activities. I think maybe the concept of the grant program and its purpose was, was not something they fully grasped to begin with. So it was a hard lesson learned for me. And yeah, TK has a great comment here in the chat about we always sent payments in smaller chunks, and the future funds were contingent on turning in deliverables because we had an issue with the partner spending a big chunk of funds and not delivering.
Almost definitely. I think having those funds allocated for those partners, but not giving them everything all at once, having a disbursement strategy for the funds is super important. That's what happens with us, and some of the grants that we're a part of have released funds in stages, especially with the fellowship I'm a part of. It's in 3 different stages that I get my funds for. And yeah, I think that's a really important thing, because if you just release everything at once in hopes that it will all get done, you get to the end, nothing has been done, or maybe they didn't use the funds as they were supposed to, or something that kind of helps protect you from doing that, from that happening in the future. So yeah, TK, thank you for sharing that.
I have a question about with the fiscal sponsorship at the university. I know in orgs it's kind of or nonprofits, it's kind of 7% or something like that they will take. Is it different with universities as far as how much percentage they would take of the, whatever money is received?
Yeah, for the NEH with Columbia that we're applying for, they're taking 10%. So it's a pretty big chunk, but they also have a full office dedicated to putting these grant applications together. So it's to fund that whole thing. But yeah, I think it might vary between or like institution. I don't think there's like a set rate depending on who you're working with. Does anyone in the Zoom room have any experience with fiscal sponsor and or university organizations taking a percentage? But yeah, usually there is like a facilitator's fee or something like that. So that's what we're experiencing with the NEH, but that's just something usually they like through CHO would take, I think what we talked about was like 5%. Because they are a very small nonprofit, and they don't want to take too much away from what we might be getting. So that's a more like hyper-local way that's not taking a big chunk out of it. But it's funny because that money goes fast because you have to think about like, yeah, it is still taxable, it's like, you're not barred from that. So we do put away, enough to make sure that we're covered, even though a lot of our expenses will be written off from the project as like payments to commission, like commissions and things like that, and gear and all the things that we would normally write off. So yeah, budget, there's a lot to talk about with budgets. So yeah, so we're talking about contributors as partners, like how narrators and donors are also in partnership with us, and the way to kind of uplift those experiences and stories. And I chose the Four of Wands because the Four of Wands is like a celebratory card. It's like the idea of celebrating a milestone. And I think it's really important to celebrate the people who are helping you build the archive, the collection together, right? Whether that's like if you're having an exhibition of their work, inviting them to that exhibition and having them speak about their contributions, or just having them more involved. If you don't already know about them, the Southside Home Movie Project does a lot of this type of work, and it's really, really awesome to see how they put together their archive out in Chicago. They invite people from the community. They do these like DJ remixes of home movies. They invite the families to come talk and speak, and it's a big like celebration of the material. So I really look to them as like an example of how they really are fostering relationships with their donors and their narrators. And that's one of the big key components is like, how are you fostering relationships of reciprocity and respect? How do you maintain that? At the oral history conference last year, one oral historian, the first session I went to was both presenters were from the Valley, which was so funny. I was just like, whoa, we're all from some, we all introduced ourselves, and I said I was from the Rio Grande Valley, and they're like, we're from the Rio Grande Valley. And I was like, what a world, a small world. But one of them was very much about fostering, keeping in touch with their narrators and like having these relationships. She's gone to like their daughter's birthday party and stuff like that. Whereas the other person was very much like not like very clinical in his approach about like oral history, which not to say either way is bad, but for what or bad or good or whatever, I think there's a spectrum. But I think it's important as we move forward in doing cultural work and this type of work that we do establish these relationships of reciprocity and respect. Doesn't mean you have to be best friends with everyone, but it does mean that you have to hold them to a standard that you'd like to be held yourself to, and that goes into like avoiding extractive approaches to collections and exhibitions, right? Because we're working together to create it. We're co-creating the archive. We're not saying like, give me your memories and then I'll never see you again, sort of thing. We want them to be a part of it. And I take cues from the post-custodial model, which uses technology in pursuit of a more collaborative approach to multinational archival work, taken up by archivists interested in human rights and social justice as a way to shift the balance of power in archival preservation. This is just giving people who are donating to the archive, who are narrators, more agency over their materials that they're bringing in. So our donor agreements for ENTRE are really specific in the sense that we let we write them to be very clear that we do not own any of these materials. Like we share this material with the person. And if we're under, like, you know, they can always change the way they wish their material to be either accessible online or not. Most people opt in to have their stuff accessible online so people can view it. But we always leave it open to say, if you ever feel uncomfortable or don't want this story out there, like we will take it down and respect your wishes for that, you know? And it's always just leaving that door open, because you might not know what might happen in the future. And we want to let people know that they are the stewards of their memories and they have that control, and we're not just keeping it in the safe. Like, it will definitely be maintained and preserved by us, but it doesn't mean that everything might be public access all the time. It's just dependent on who is open to that, which, like I said, most people are. But it's nice to have that stipulation in the contract, because then it helps people feel like more secure in their decision to be a part of the collection. And yeah, like I said, inviting narrators and donors to events where their memories and images will be showcased. And most importantly, which I think I touched on a little bit earlier, is like sharing and supporting the work of individuals and other organizations that align with your mission, you know, making sure you're creating those. We can be doing completely opposite different things, but both of us have the same values and goals for our own projects. That we should be uplifting one another. We should be partnering together, like what I mentioned earlier with the lupus screening, where we brought in all those different orgs that work on the ground with immigrant communities in our region. Like we don't do that work specifically, but we want to support it because it aligns with what we're trying to do as an organization. And so being able to find ways to creatively bring those things together and uplift and enhance like visibility for these different orgs is super important. And the way you start building those connections and partnerships, you never know if in the future there might be a time where you're able to present something together, you know, or you come into collaboration with someone. You never know. So I think it's really important, and it creates that community effort as well. Let me pull it up. It's right here.
You got the link right on the slide.
Yeah. I think I just pulled it from here. Oops. Oh, sorry. I'm switching from a Mac to a PC right now. So all my, let's see, Control C, Control V. That's where I pulled it from, TK. But yes, Hannah Albert Abrams. Good job. All right.
I'm a few bars and TK can fake it.
Yeah. I think I might only have, okay, have only a couple slides left, and then we can continue our discussion. So yeah, like going through all of that, I keep going back to this idea of sustainability and these partnerships, right? So the Empress represents nurturing of all the things that, like nurturing of self, of the garden that you're growing, of your ecosystem, of your networks, of your connections, and just yourself. And how do we sustain our practice? How do we sustain the work we're doing beyond our own existence? Like for me, ENTRE would hopefully live beyond my involvement in it. You know, I would love for it to, I'm setting foundation for that to be created. Because I believe it's necessary to have a space like that in the region I'm from. And I would hope that in the future it can still continue to thrive and evolve as it needs to be with the needs of the community, beyond from my own involvement. So yeah, how can we provide support to ourselves and one another when collaborating or working in partnership? Always trying to check in with ourselves and each other to see what is it that we need in terms of like, whether it's just like, I just need some time to sleep or go take a nap, you know, or I need some food, or I need a moment of connection with someone, or, you know, something like that. We always want to just find ways to provide that for ourselves and those that we are working with. And what are the basic needs of the peoples and communities we are working with? How do we make sure those needs are being satisfied? I think that's always at the forefront of this work, is to always come back to the mission and like what we're trying to do with these projects, what they're serving in the larger sense of our culture and our communities. And those needs are ever changing. It's kind of referring to like emergent strategy. If you've read that book or listened, yeah, or the podcast, Emergent Strategy podcast is amazing. I really love listening to those podcasts and like kind of just learning more about how different people from across the world are implementing major social change in their areas. It's really inspiring. And so just thinking about how we always have to, everything's always in flux and everything's changing, and we always have to be constantly adapting to that change, and that's just not going to stop. So how the check-ins are important because things are constantly moving, and our needs are going to be shifting at all times. So how can we be creative, and how can we help one another satisfy those needs? Just like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I just keep going back to that, like, oh, you can't like, get to self-actualization unless you have all those basic needs met. So I think just figuring out like what that is for not just an organization, but the community and the people that you're working with, and how you can kind of help that out and help facilitate those needs to be met is important. And then also, how do we assess our progress, celebrate milestones, and make time to rest and reflect? Those are super important things. I think in our culture, we move so quickly that we're just trying to hit benchmarks. Like, okay, we did that. Now we're going on to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And it's easy to just keep going. But you definitely need to sit back and like, once you've done something, take a moment to celebrate what you've done to get to that point in the project, or like, especially like, if you're just starting, my milestones were like, I submitted that application, like, yes, I deserve like, an extra 2 hours sleep in, or something, like something that, that will help me feel like celebrated for the work I put into writing this application. Because like I said, it takes a lot of intellectual labor, and it drains you to do these grant applications and things like that, especially if you're working on your own in the beginning and stuff like that. It's important.
I like the idea of celebrating when you get an application in too, because whether or not you get it, you did it.
Yeah.
I think I always also think about the writing of the grant application, or a project proposal, or even like anything that doesn't get funded, approved, realized. It's still, I know I'm going to mine that for future things. It's an investment, and it may have a greater or lesser degree of payoff, but it's always an investment. It's never time wasted.
Exactly.
Because you the thinking time that matters, the meeting time, the discussion time, the creative ideation matters, and the writing, like those words you can use again. Like, words don't run out.
Yes.
They don't have battery power. Like, you can cut and paste from that grant application over and over again. And so in the essential documents workshop that we did a few weeks ago, we talked about these things as being kind of modules that you generate and reuse and regrow. Just the way, to return to your metaphor of a garden from before, like you plant seeds, they grow, they flower, and then you let them go, and then they yield more seeds that you can plant again. So it's a cyclical process. So even if the plant doesn't, even if the fruit is no good, no bueno, no tasty, then you still get seeds.
Yeah, no, it's I think what Snowden just said about the grant writing process. I save like everything in a Google folder every year for all the grants all the applications. I copy paste whatever the questions are on the application site, and I put them in a Google Doc. I write them out and make sure everything's written well. And then I submit it when I need to. But I hold on to those applications because you never know in the future. It just helps. It makes it so much easier to just go back. Oh yeah, I wrote about this specific thing that they're asking about in this other application. Let me just move that over and tweak it a little bit.
I have job postings, like jobs that I don't even want or plan to apply for. Like, if they have language in it, like I harvest stuff like that. I have a folder of just like bad ideas, like that just aren't ready yet. Does anybody else have a notebook or a folder on your computer, or like a document of the paragraphs you had to cut out of something that like you're like, oh, this was so choice
Yeah.
that I just couldn't fit. Yeah, like those trimmings, the orts and scantlings.
Yes, I think it's important to keep all of that stuff because you never know, like it's coming out of your head for a reason, right? So it could possibly be it may not fit what you need it to fit into right now, but it could possibly fit into something later.
It's also visible evidence of having done something.
Mhm.
You know, the process is there's a lot of waste in every process.
Yeah.
And if you're getting to the end of the day and you're feeling like you haven't done anything, just having all those false starts and loose ends is a useful reminder that like, no, I'm tired because I worked and I produced stuff, and you know, for every film that gets shot, you know, directors and filmmakers talk about shooting 3:1 or 1:1, and that is like you use 1/3 of the material that you captured. You use 1% of the material that you captured.
Mhm.
I think what we see in the finished product is often so polished and tidy, we forget how much mess there is.
Yeah.
Like, topiary, like,
Mhm.
like somebody's coming
The
around
trimmer.
with a flower, like there's a dancing bear on the edge, but like there was a lot of like Edward Scissorhands like activity going on first, and then somebody came around with a leaf blower and cleaned it up to make that beautiful thing. It's important to remember that. It's important to keep the stuff that you've quote unquote thrown away.
Yes, and like also at the bottom here in the bottom right where I put process over output, right? So it's like it's not about I mean, it is, but like really you're figuring out how to get to the end goal, right? And that's where a lot of the richness lies, is in that process and being able to be okay with and be patient through that process, because it's really not a race to get there. Yes, there are things that are urgent and like time sensitive or at risk and things like that, but I think over time, I think sustainability outweighs like the rushedness feeling that we might feel with archives. Archive work is always going to feel like super like urgent that we need to do this, but I think process over output is a way of framing things to kind of keep ourselves a little bit more in line with the fact that this work is what's it called? It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So it's like we have to maintain our energy levels.
Journey, not destination.
Exactly. It's like we have to maintain our pace, because we can easily burn out doing this work, and that's not fun, and it takes a while to recover from burnout. And I think obviously you can't avoid it all the time, but if we can just put in practice there and become more okay with like being a little slower with stuff sometimes, in terms of just making sure we're doing things the right way and making sure we're celebrating and taking time to rest after completing a certain project is super important. I know for me personally, when I'm around a lot of people, like at an event or something, and it's something I've been working towards for a while, I need at least a day or two afterwards by myself, not talking to anyone, to regroup my energy. If not, I'm like worth nothing to anyone. I won't have anything to give to anyone. I won't have any ideas. I won't be able to function. So for me, that's personal. Like, I know everyone's different. Some people thrive off of connection, and that it fuels them, and that's cool too. You know, just knowing what works for you and how to implement that into your work structure and your process is super important. And just something to think about as we, like, just in a lifestyle way, I think too. Like, I think in our society, we're always told to like just keep pushing and moving forward and process and to create, to produce, to make the most use of our time. But I think there's some beauty in the slowness and the resting periods, the gestation periods of ideation and implementation, like between that time.
I even just appreciate the idea and execution of a bad idea and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's sometimes hard for me to start a project. Like, I'm working on a chapter with some coworkers right now, and I'm like, I just like need to get the lit review done. But I'm like, well, once I like actually put the sources together, I don't know, it's like setting myself up, you know, it's like that as a barrier. But I'm also, what was brought to mind is like kind of like that trope of a scene where like the writer is scribbling away and like balls it up and throws it in the trash can. I'm like, something.
Well, and then there's always a custodian that comes in afterwards and they open it up and like, this is genius, right? It was beautiful poetry I've never read. I think sometimes I like to revisit because future me is a lot easier on, like a lot less critical than present me. Like present me's ferocious inner critic is alive and like pouncing on everything that comes up. Future me is like, dang, past you, like, you did that. That's awesome. So I sometimes think that the bad ideas look better if they're the only ideas you've had about things. I think that time takes the edges off stuff, and it gives, distance is useful, and you may sometimes it's just not right yet. And sometimes it's nice to let things ferment for a while, and then you're like, oh, I see where I was going with that. Like I didn't quite get there, but you know what? I can like pull this out and just like give it a little bit more of a polish, or I can like keep working with this clay and like I can actually get it there now, or I know more and I have the tools to realize this in a way that I didn't before. I just met somebody at this thing who does that, and like this can happen now. Like it's time now.
Yeah, I have an example of just that, what you're saying. So, and going back to grant writing. So when I applied for the Mid-America Arts Alliance, it was called the Interchange Artist Grant. That was what the grant was called. And I applied for ENTRE, but as a project-based application, not just as an organization. And the application, the proposal I sent in was that I wanted to commission, I think I said like 8 filmmakers to create a city symphony of life on the border. So like we would pair a filmmaker from Brownsville with someone from Matamoros, which is a sister city in Mexico, and they would work together to make a city symphony film about that little region. And then with 3 other port of entries along the border and into Stark County area where I'm originally from. And I still think that idea is, I got the grant like based on that application, but what was so wonderful, and there's something maybe to look out for in the future for grants, is like unrestricted grant funds, because they're not being kept to the standards of your application. We totally didn't do that with that grant. We used the money to really set up the foundational stuff, like get our LLC. There was get some gear that we needed for some workshops. We were able to commission some people, but the idea was just it was too early to implement something like that for the organization, I found, because it's like we were barely getting to know our community, barely getting to see who was interested in what we were doing, whether it was going to take, were people interested, was it something that the community needed or wanted. I didn't know any artists in Mexico yet, so it was like a dream that I really wanted to realize, but it wasn't the right moment. And now, like a year and a half later, I've already met individuals from like Matamoros and Brownsville. I'm like, oh, okay. So then they're leading me to other people in different areas of like Reynosa and all those things and all those other sister cities. So I'm like, this could possibly work. I don't think we're there yet either, like right now, but I think in the future that idea is still there and still viable. And I think, what they said when we had a meeting for the interchange grant, we had like different artist facilitator meetings throughout the year. And it was lovely because they were just saying how, don't worry about your original proposal. Like what you're getting, these grants are supposed to be funded upon like the vision and the idea of the potential of your project. And you got it because of the potential of what you're creating, not specifically for what you wrote about, but what it could possibly bring into the world. So that made me feel really seen, and also like just like affirmed that like, oh yeah, you don't have to stick to an idea just because you said you were going to do it at this moment. Like sometimes it's not the right time, and it's okay to kind of put it away for a while and wait for the right moment. Like I had mentioned earlier with the sentient art film people who had asked us to do that screening at Lupe last year, but we definitely didn't have the capacity to do it. We were doing a bunch of other workshops, and we did not have the energy or the energy to really create that screening environment in a thoughtful way, which is what we always try to do with our work. And sure enough, we said no, and they came back around the next year when we had more capacity for it. So, you know, I like to think about things like happening when they need to. I believe in divine timing. I know that like planting seeds, ideas, and these partnerships, creating like and starting on these relationship journeys and just making connections with people that believe in the same things you do and are passionate about the memory work and the culture, the work about being culture bearers and preservationists and archivists. Like, you connect already on that fundamental level, even if they're not, you know, if they're community members, they might feel the same way, you know, like about how important it is to preserve these histories and these stories. So that's fundamentally the baseline of what you all believe in and agree on. Things can grow from there, you know. It's that's why with this workshop I wanted to really highlight relationships, because it's, I mean, an intentionality behind those relationships, because I think we have been told to just seek out, you know, people who are going to help us, you know, who are going to get us somewhere, without thinking about like, well, what do I do for, like, what is the relationship? What is the exchange? Is it purely transactional? How can we move beyond that? How can we, you know, reconnect with one another in a way that is not exploitive or extractive? And I think it's just the basis of everything moving forward for projects, at least that we're doing with ENTRE. And I think I see a lot of it in a lot of different orgs that are working like, I get that we were part of the MIA Pathways Fellowship panel. We, as in the Center for Home Movies, it was a panel for the MIA Pathways Fellows. And they gathered all volunteer-run organizations to kind of talk about their organization, how people can get involved and stuff like that. And Transfer Collective, I don't know if you've all heard of them. They're out in New York. XFR. And they're super cool. They run I think their space is like at the Pit in Brooklyn, which is like an anarchist like library space. It's super awesome. And they have like pop-up digitization workshops there. And one of the things they mentioned in their panel was just like, we learned that, you know, not sometimes a really great idea is probably not possible because no one has the time to do it. So in meetings, we say, someone brings up an idea like, oh, we should do this. And everyone's like, yeah, that sounds awesome. And they're like, okay, so who's going to do it? And like, no one raises their hands. They're like, okay, we're not doing it, you know, moving on.
So when I was married, that was the way we know that my household was. If my partner said, oh, we need to do blah, 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 I'd be like, are you saying please do blah, 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 or please will you do, or I am going to do, because those are two different sentiments, and neither of them is the same as we need to.
Yeah. So I really liked that when they said that. I was just like, oh man, that's like a perfect way of gauging capacity, is being like, well, who would want to take this on as a leader, like, you know, leading the project? And if no one says anything, we're like, well, I guess we're not doing that project right now. We can probably do it in the future and revisit it later, but like right now, no. And yeah, sometimes a good idea just takes some time to, like, you know, find its footing, find its people. But doesn't mean you have to discard it, you know?
That's another reason to have that sort of like maybe later bad ideas document, because often people will come across the transom, like people who want to volunteer, want to be involved, and they bring a skill set and or a set of resources or access to resources, and they say, hey, I want to be involved. And you say, like, here's a list of stuff that we've always wanted to do. Does any of that match with what you have? And sometimes there is a match.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes there's like the random Lego pieces fit
I
together.
love that idea, actually.
Yeah, and I feel like that's often a situation that if you're an organization or an institution that's always like in the midst of stuff, it's hard to take a strategic approach and stand back and prioritize and say, these are right now things, these are next year things, and these are someday as time, space, and resources permit things. and having that list of someday things
Mhm.
that you can draw on, or, and again, talking about money and the value of things, like knowing how much stuff costs that you need, and being able to say to somebody who comes around, like, oh, like I am a rich person, or I'm a person who is well-resourced in other ways.
Mhm.
What do you need to be able to be like, oh, well, really, anything is good. Like, just be specific.
Yeah.
You're more likely to get something if you ask for something.
Mhm.
If you ask for everything, you will probably get nothing, or anything. You will get nothing. If you ask for something, you might not get the whole thing, but you could get something, or in the direction of that thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that idea of keeping a list of things that are someday things, or
Yeah.
because
Amazon wish list.
yeah, just
or
like
the non-major corporation equivalent.
yeah, so like because with ENTRE we have a lot of things that we need to do and I'm always like trying to see who's coming through the space and who has been showing up a lot and what skills they have, and that we have a growing AV library that we're trying to get it ready so people who are becoming members of our space can like rent stuff out for free, but we need a system of checking it all out and doing all that stuff. And like, I mean, I could do that, but I also like that's time intensive and like probably not, I shouldn't be spending my time doing that right now if I have all these other responsibilities on my plate. So just seeing who comes through, I've already met like 2 librarians who are super enthusiastic about our space and everything. And I'm like, do you want to come catalog our space and our things? And we can figure out a system for us because we need a system, and yeah, it's just like thinking of things like that, keeping that running list of stuff that needs to be done, but maybe we don't have capacity for it right now to do, and seeing who comes into the project or the space or to the into your realm that might have that is super important to think about and to have in your back pocket.
Yeah, and having that be like bite-sized stuff too. Projects that are small but significant, or or even, I mean, I've worked at places where just having somebody come in who's good at organizing stuff. I mean, I keep thinking about that tweet about like budgeting, like where it's like like $3,000 a month for candles, and then the person is like, someone who is good at budgets, please help my family is dying. I worked at one specific place where the staff was just overflowing and so unorganized, and having somebody who was working with us, we had a student worker who was just an organizer extraordinaire, and just like got that label maker out and started putting things, like they just transformed the space. And it was just something that they didn't think very much of that, but it made such a contribution. They were just like, oh, it's like no big deal. Like I just did it in an afternoon. We were like, you were the best person we've ever had for us.
Yes.
And so that can also, again, the commensurate value, like that is something that you may not value in yourself, but other people know how to value it in a different way than you do. So as with cultural competency or other soft skills, being able to reframe that to somebody is like, this is actually like a professional qualification or something that makes you really suited to working in particular environments. Have you ever thought about that? And they may not have.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, teaching people to revalue what they have is really fun.
They're already their skills and inherent abilities.
And articulating it. Often people don't hear that that this makes you exceptional. Like you are exceptional in this respect, and it really matters that you care about the details, or that you have good handwriting.
Good handwriting is a big one.
Holy moly, yeah,
I have terrible handwriting.
Penmanship and attention to detail, like those things I've learned when I work with teams. To especially early on in the process, like I was working on an artist inventory, I learned really early on to be like, that is exactly the instinct that like is making you good at this project. Like I really appreciate you noting that we used the same number twice on 2 different pieces of art. Like, thank you for catching that. Always tell me if you see that again. Because often when they're powering up next in a team environment with their senior, like boss, you know.
They might not feel comfortable bringing it up.
Exactly. So collaborating with people or other groups involves sort of setting early expectations about correction and input and what sort of corrections you value.
Yes. And I think at least for me in the types of collaborations I've been in, I've always been very upfront with like, this is what I know, and it might not, like, I'm always open to relearning something if I'm doing it wrong or if it's outdated. Like just recently, this group of individuals that is in the Valley were making a video and they were having issues with the upload times. And it was like this, they were like, these renders are like 7 hours and blah, blah, blah. And like, I come from like a post background. So I was like, let me get on the phone with you and see what's going on. And I was talking to them but then I realized I was like, maybe they know something that I don't. I was just like, this is what I normally do. And I've always gotten like decent results out of it. But, you know, this is just, I'm open. If you think that that's not right to do, tell me, because like, I want to know if you think there's a new standard that I should be approaching.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because like, this is just what I've been doing. And I'm always happy to shift that, mechanical influence to like, oh, this is always what I've been doing, so I'm going to keep doing it. Like I'm always conscious of trying to like shift away from that and just continuously be open to learning new things. So yeah, it's super important to like kind of set that precedent, because they were much younger than me too. So they probably thought I knew everything, and I'm just like, no, I don't know everything. Like you probably know more than me.
Yeah, like I'm always like sort of both flattered and embarrassed when somebody assumes that I know more than I do. And I'm often like, no, you need to understand I am a perfect idiot. Like, assume that I'm a perfect idiot and that like and it's always okay to ask why. I would love to hear from anybody in the Zoom room or in the physical room if you have lessons you've learned from others that way, or like processes that other folks have introduced you to, and ways in which collaborating or teaming up with someone changed the way you work. And it doesn't have to be archives related.
Yeah.
It can be like, stuff in the kitchen or just like in your everyday life. Like my sister-in-law, she just throws how like your liquid detergent comes in the tub with the cup that you pour, and she just like throws the cup into the wash.
That's what my sister does too.
Clean. And then instead of having like detergent all gunked up around the edge, and I was like, this just blew my mind that you do that. Like life hacks, man.
Yeah.
So that's another benefit of collaboration. I'd love to hear examples of people learning and taking away small things like that from working with others.
Yeah, I'm always willing to be wrong. Or not always, but I try to do that. I mean, there's definitely times I'm stubborn, but I can't really count I think about stuff, even if I feel like I can't be wrong in that moment, I'll still think about it later. So sometimes I get stuck on that.
Yeah.
Not feeling to be, that kind of stuff. So then later I'll really delve and think about it, come back and be like, oh, that really helped me out in ways. So I don't know. I think I just try to absorb what I can and try to process it.
Yeah, sometimes you don't know why you do things, and then you come back and you're like, no, I'm affirmed in my vision. It's the stimulus to think through something that was intuitive can also be elective.
One of my early work experiences where we had our weekly stand-up meetings, it felt very much like, oh, this is when you talk about all your accomplishments and all your future plans, but you're together, you're productive, you're doing things. But then I think particularly noticeable in one of my grad assistantships where it was a library unit focused on primary literacy and instruction for first year undergrad. There was just it was a lot more human. There was a lot more focus on affect and empathy. And it's what do we need help on? But also people, even my unit leaders would be very upfront, hey, this is what I need help with. If I help you with anything. And what's your capacity? And even some of my coworkers now, model that, and like, ooh, like I would really appreciate an extra hand for this oral history project. And so I think both inviting other people into your work and letting people know when you need help, but then also I was like, oh, like I haven't, helped conduct an oral history in a while, so I think this would be really valuable for me. And also I have time on this day, so of course I can help you set up cameras and like, and so yeah, I really, those have been like a few individual, but also broader work culture that have been really important for how I approach things, or how I'm wanting to approach things.
And that points to process over output, I think. So do you have advice for how to cultivate honesty in what can, I think, as Anastasia suggests, when you're doing capacity check-ins or just project updates or status updates with project partners, it can become performative. And it can be like, oh, we did all this, we did all that, and the focus can be only on what's working. Do you have suggestions for how to ensure that it's honest, real, and complete, like a 360 rather than just the sunshine?
Yeah, no, most definitely. We don't want to be like toxic positivity or just like being like, oh, I can do it all, sort of thing. I think what I've found in the collaborations I've been a part of is that the people I've been working with they value that transparency. So I think that's a big part of it. It's like, that's why collaborating with people who have those values is so, like, similar value systems is so important, because then you can be honest with each other. You don't have to feel like you have to perform a certain way. Sometimes you feel like you're doing, like you start performing and then you're like, wait, I'm performing, and maybe you dial it back or like recheck in later on. I think for me, when me and Andres are friends, and like we check in with each other emotionally before each meeting to see where we're at. I think, and also with the Center for Home Movies, what we do in every board meeting now is this thing called Rose and a Thorn. And we do, just like what's ailing us right now, and then or we can do one or either, or both or whatever. And it's just in one thing that we're really excited about, and so it keeps things honest. I think if people feel they appreciate the vulnerability in one another. If you say if you let someone know, like, right now I'm having like a kind of a hard day emotionally, like I don't think I really have the capacity to be in this meeting for that long, or I can say what I like my part of the project, but I don't, I need some time or whatever. I think it's important to be really honest with each other, but I think it's hard to get there, especially in workplaces that you've probably been a part of for a while, or environments that are kind of set in their ways. I think it's easy to start fostering that with like new partnerships and things like that, or to finding people that, like I said, believe like are in the same value alignment as you are, that value that sort of input from you. I don't know. I feel like it's been something that I've only been able to experience in the past few years, that I'm able to be very open with the people I'm working with in terms of like where I'm at and what capacity levels I have, whether I can't, do something, but I also have the tendency to overdo things. And so it's a constant check-in with myself. I think like we were talking about earlier yesterday, like it's this personal thing, like where I know that I don't need to be doing everything, but sometimes like I feel like I talk like I'm doing everything, and like just like, or that I got it all together or something. But I'm learning like knowing when to ask for help. It's hard because we're conditioned to be so independent, and to be like self-sufficient. Like these are goals that we want to hit, and at a certain sense, like they are like, important for our own self-development, but it further drives us from that collective, way of living, like, and being able to be in community with people, is to be vulnerable and to be open to discussing like harder things, and like asking for help, asking for assistance, asking for feedback, and being open to receiving like, good critique, and not feeling like you have to have it all together all the time. Yes, there's like things that you need to accomplish at certain, we were talking about like deadlines and things like that, but like sometimes life just happens and you can't stop it from happening. And sometimes that just takes precedent over the work, and we have to be flexible in those moments. And I think that's why it's really important to make these intentional collaborations and partnerships, because those people will know that, you know, they will respect that, or they will understand at least that you need that space or that time or that assistance, you know, like, oh, let's find ways to like help, you know, what can we do? So yeah, I think it's still a work in progress for me for sure. And it will always be, I think, because I just have a personality type that is very like, I like to be busy a lot, even though I'm trying to slow down, but I like the busyness because it keeps me from thinking about other things sometimes.
Yeah.
So
Well, if I had answers, I would have shared them with you.
Yeah.
All of you. But a really good friend of mine, Lynn Boyden, is a really collaborative teacher.
Mhm.
And one of the things that she does when she's teaching, like an exercise like Rose and Thorn, which I love, is for her midterm check-ins with her students, she does start, stop, continue. So she asks her students, like, just, you know, like you don't have to fill out anything, just like, here's an index card, right? One thing you want me to stop doing, one thing you want me to start doing, and one thing you want me to continue doing. And so she gets the temperature of the whole room, she gets feedback that's actionable at a time when she can still implement it, you know, before the end of the semester, and or academic unit, whatever calendar they happen to be on. And the you know, it's genuine, like it's a small enough chunks that people can actually come up with things. And it's genuine that, you know, it really opens the door for the students to be like, yeah, we really get to ask for what we want and need, and tell you, like, you know, please stop calling me by a mispronounced version of my name, or, you know, like it lowers the stakes while raising the impact.
Yeah.
I think.
I love that. I love that idea.
I do too. I do too. And I have to remind myself of things like that, these little tricks and tips.
All right. Well, my last slide is just resources and citations, because I think it's important to cite your sources, and that's a way of respecting other people that you admire. I've just cited Pamela Coleman Smith as the illustrator of these tarot cards.
The Rider-Waite Tarot.
Which is obviously a very like Eurocentric tarot. I have other ones at home that are more abstract and stuff, but I felt like these were the more well-known cards and images. And strength, you know, I put it at the end because these are things, hopefully these resources will hopefully bring you more I guess courage to go forward and continue doing this work, and know that you are supported. And there are plenty of ways to be inspired daily when you feel a little bit low in continuing the work, because it can get hard at times, like we were discussing earlier. And that's important time for rest and reflection, and just to do stuff that brings you joy so that you feel fulfilled and that your cup is filled before you're able to fill others' cups. So I'm sharing with you as inspiration. I don't know if any of you all know about Arena. It's are.na. It's a really cool platform that you can create these channels. Here, I'll open one for you so you can see. I have a few. This one's the archive channel. Okay, yeah, you can see that on my Zoom, right? Cool. So you can make these different blocks and channels, and you can, I don't know about you, but I was a multi-tab user for a very long time. I had all these tabs open on my browsers at all times, and I did not know how to organize them. So my friend turned me on to Arena. And so now I have them different subheadings. This one's just for archive. So anything that I come across that's archive related that I am really inspired by, or that I need, like, that's really good information for me, I add it to the Arena channel. So there's a ton of stuff in here for y'all to like peruse.
It's like Pinterest meets bookmarks.
Exactly. Yes. Lots of cool stuff there. I did one for memory work. I love this one, the moving forward one that I made, because it's more about like social action moving forward and like ways of shaping our futures, different types of books, how to build a world. So a bunch of things just to kind of, yeah, really like this map. I'm sure you all have seen. I don't know what's going on with this mouse here, but role in ecosystem, like different. I think that's like going back to the beginning of the presentation, talking about what are your strengths, what do you know that you can bring to the table, what do you have that you can bring to the table that you already know about. All of this kind of plays into this social change ecosystem, knowing that we all have different skill sets and talents that contribute to the larger whole of our society. And if we're all collaborating together and working towards a different way of approaching our future, we can change things. And it just can start really small, whether that's in your community or in your family or your friend group, it doesn't have to be this big, sometimes we think like, oh, that's like the whole thing, being from the macro to micro thing that I was talking about, the Alice syndrome, being able to exist within the little parts and the big parts all at once, and knowing that you're interconnected at all times is super important. And the way I see building, at least with ENTRE, the way I see it growing forward. This manifesto was super important to me as well. It talked about co-ops in the 30s. And it's what it said was like, they wouldn't let anyone become a part of the co-op if they were over 35 years old, because they're just like, once you're 35, you're out because you are stuck in your ways. And so I'm like 30 out. I'm 35. Yeah. I was like, how old am I? I'm out of the co-op. But like what I take from it is that, like, yeah, you constantly have to continue learning, right? You can't just stay stuck in the way of your own way of thinking. And sometimes you may feel comfortable in doing that, but it's always pushing you out of that little comfort zone and that bubble. And this really, I was just like, yeah, you know what? Yeah. Older people out of the co-op. I mean, the younger people to make the decisions for the future,
Or just be mindful about the space that you're taking up.
Exactly.
Right? That to know that your time on any project is limited.
Yes.
Whether it's by the natural constraints imposed by a grant period or a calendar at the end of which you're doing an event or whatever, like your time is limited.
Yes.
And people might be imposing those limits on you from outside, or they, like you might outstay that welcome. Either of you have worked with organizations, or any of you have worked with organizations that have founders syndrome.
Yes, that's a big one.
But that is pernicious. And I love the idea that you get welcomed in, but you also get told at some point you have to leave, and it's not personal.
Yeah.
It's not about you. It's about, the clock just ran out, and you get to make space. You get to go.
Exactly.
I think we're seeing that in American politics with, long-serving members of Congress who are, leaving leadership roles and doing so more or less consciously, and the critiques that we have about that. In a circumstance where seniority carries real power, and how do we balance recognizing wisdom, experience, institutional knowledge versus calcification and reluctance and sort of entrenched ways of working. I think that even if you don't have hard and fast rules about that, staying alert, yes, and being reflective constantly is so important.
Most definitely, I agree. And founder syndrome is a real thing, and it's definitely something at the forefront of my mind all the time with ENTRE, because I'm just like, I don't want to turn into that person. And so I have to be constantly checking and making checks and balances with our system, making sure we're bringing on new people to do some of these things that maybe I've already done, like the eco-processing classes that I've led like 2 or 3 of them already. And some of those participants, I would like them to lead them. I don't want to be doing it all the time. I love it, but they have probably a different approach. One person already came up to me and was like, can I have those formulas again? I'm going to work with a chemist and And I was like, please go ahead and develop a new formula and bring it to the center, and we'll try something, you can teach another class. Yeah. So come on. Another thing I wanted to share was this toolkit for creative, cooperative, and collaborative work. It's an amazing, I found this when I first was doing research for ENTRE and putting that manifesto together. It's a beautifully put together, just little overview of how to work with people, especially in cooperatives, how to manage, like roles and hierarchy. Growth work was a big one, like accountability and intention. Conflict, because there's always going to be conflict when you're working with so many types of different individuals and you're trying to bring together, like what I was talking about earlier with the SpaceX people in our community who are like really into Elon Musk, but may not know about the repercussions of SpaceX on our community through that, whether that be environmental or health issues or the destruction of sacred land. These things they might not know about them. And so how do we work with those parameters of conflict and tension and not just shut people out, but to like bring them into the conversation and have a dialogue. So this really, this toolkit really helped me kind of understand all that, a little bit more and how to like think about that. It's always going to be growing. It also talks about how it's really beautifully made. Yes. A lot of things. It talks about how like sometimes you just need to like where is it? The growth. Sometimes where it is growth work at the end. Sometimes you just got to shut it down, at a certain point. Sometimes it's not working anymore and you have to be okay with that. So at least for like forming an organization or a group or a cooperative, a collective, you have there might be a time limit, like we we're talking about. There might be a time limit where things just have to come to an end naturally, and we have to be okay with that. And just being, I believe in the idea of impermanence. So just a lot of this really resonated with me, and like how non-ownership and impermanence kind of reflected in this type of collaborative work is super important to keep in the front of your mind, because it's not always going to stay the same. It's always going to evolve. Collectives and organizations are an organic, they're an organism, a living organism that you have to nurture, you have to care for. And maybe at some point it's just time for it to just move on or, be composted into something else. Kind of like what we saw with the Echo Park Film Center, and like how now there's all these other things like that sprouted through it, right? So I wanted to share that with you, and that's all here. It's all linked in the presentation, which we'll share. We'll share all these resources with you afterwards as well. And then there's just kind of like basic practicalities, how to draft an MOU, how to draft a conflict of interest policy, a MIA fiscal sponsorship, and the equity budgeting manifesto that I wanted to share with you all. And a lot of these things, like you can always, like if you're unsure about like these types of documents, which can feel like very like legalese sometimes, like they can be very, very simple and straightforward. For me, it's like, as long as you have it in writing somewhere and it outlines the basic concepts of what your collaboration is entailing or what the expectations of either party are, then you're good, like that's all you need.
I think often it's far preferable, especially if you're dealing with people who are non-experts.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's way better, and I can tell you, I've learned this from painful experience as well. It's way better to have something that doesn't like look as official, but more clearly communicates your mutual intentions, than to have something that is ironclad from a legal standpoint, but that neither party can make heads or tails of.
Yeah.
I think what the point of having documentation, or the point of putting things in writing, is to clarify intent.
Mm-hmm.
And if what you have in writing makes the intent less clear, then it's definitionally not a good document.
Mm-hmm.
Lately, these amendments are larger donations, I haven't worked with them, but 2 times recently there's been like one line in one of our gift agreements that then, like, of course people will like bring their lawyers in, and like 2 separate attorneys and donors were like, no, like not. And so then it's just caused like what's supposed to, like you said, like help the process and smooth things over for everybody. It's like from our end, it's like a random one, but like we could take out, and then it's like other bodies of an institution are involved. So it's, very important. If it's making it harder for everybody, then
just take it out. Yeah, it's like it's okay. And emphasizing, I think what that emphasizes that one size fits all is not a great way to approach partnerships and collaborations. I would love if we can return to that mapping your role in social change. And you said you love it. What have you used it for?
I just came across it.
Okay. Because I'm a big fan of, not just, and I love the framing of tarot here. one of the most productive class team projects I ever worked on was when I was in grad school, and I took a course on the theory and practice of effective leadership. And it was, it was grad school class. We had we had a final project, and the teacher divided us up into teams. But what was really great about it was he was a clinical psychologist and had worked at West Point. So he worked with people who were being trained to be leaders, and we really dug into the social science and the psychology research about leadership and where it comes from and how you cultivate good leadership habits. And so the first thing we did as a project team was everybody in the class sat down with their teams, and everybody for homework had to take 40 different kinds of personality inventories and tests, and the type A personality inventory and the resilience scale, and all of the and the Myers-Briggs, and all of the classic ones, and then some kind of wacky ones too. And communication styles, and this whole battery. It was like reading the world's worst issue of Cosmopolitan and taking that quiz. And then we sat down as a team and shared our results, which not only made us all very vulnerable to one another, because there are people, you realize how many value judgments you attach to being type A or not, or certain kinds of communication styles. We kind of are biased towards thinking directness, that's leadership, but sometimes being more subtle is better. Introvert and extrovert, that was another one. I worked better with that group of people after having sat down and gotten to know them in that way. Along all of those vectors, we got to know one another. And, one of the guys in the group was we were completely opposite on almost every scale. And he was somebody he was super ADD and was always on his phone and very flighty. And I was just time to focus, Fitz. We would have been in constant conflict in another setting, but I got to understand that his defaults were just set completely differently from mine. And I understood that I could choose not to be reactive to that, but I was going into this safe and comfortable place that was natural for me. He was going into a safe and natural place for him. And that wasn't intentional, or that wasn't purposeful. He wasn't trying to irritate me or ignore me. And so knowing that about him helped me work with him and the rest of the team so much better. And whether it's you do a tarot reading for everybody in the group for the project.
For me, it's a birth chart. Give me your birth chart and I can understand you a little bit more.
Yeah, your icebreakers, those icebreaker questions, they really do matter. Getting to know your partners and collaborators really helps the work get done. So I do think that connecting on a human basis, or looking at a map like this and saying oh, really, I'm more of a weaver, storyteller, disruptor. I am not a healer or caregiver. That's not my thing at all. Letting people express that and to claim those identities, or articulate those tendencies and understand that okay, well, of all of us, we don't have any experimenters in this group. So we're all gonna have to bend a little bit, or feel that we're all gonna have to get out of our comfort zone and contribute to a balanced ecosystem here. That's gonna call on all of us in a way that none of us are comfortable with. So having that understanding, whatever tool you use, whatever map or method or framework, whether it's a birth chart or a Myers-Briggs or whatever, I think I'm agnostic as to the type of tool, but I do think that reflection and self-knowledge and comparison of what everybody brings to the table is super important.
Very important, yes.
And it gets to the point of intentionality.
I'm curious because in the documentary world, there's a lot of conversation around documents, particularly because documents have been used as a tool for infecting a colonial way to and some people don't have good relationships with documents.
Or documents don't exist for them in the way that they do.
Or they're just been really bad for them, the signing documents and doing stuff, and particularly around release forms, kind of the conversation around documentary work, around how some people don't do release forms
Mhm,
and others do. When do you do release form? Like what's appropriate time? I don't know if y'all have the same conversation in our world of like, do we even do these agreements? And when do we do the agreements?
mhm.
And that kind of stuff.
I mean, I want to share with you, I don't know if you've heard of them, the documentary, something resource working group or, yeah, dog. You know about their toolkit that they've put, okay, cool. For us with ENTRE, we did do a form of documents after, like, I think I had mentioned when we went to the flea market, Bernabé like came back with like those 12 photos and just gave them to us that day. Like I didn't have any paperwork with me for him to be like, here, I'm giving you these photos, and to inventory those photos. We literally put the photos in like, we weren't expecting to get like materials that day. So we just put them in a little envelope and I put them in my laptop case and I was like, all right, just gonna scan these immediately when I get home, and I did, and then I put them in proper storage areas. And then I was just like, well, now I need a donor agreement, because this is like a real thing now. He brought us all these photos and they're valuable for him and his family. So I just kind of did a quick little research. There's so much like legalese and a lot of donor agreements that I was coming across. And I was like, this is not going to fly with Bernabé. Like he's like, just a dude in life, like who was super excited about the project. And I just want to make it easy for him to understand that these are his photos and we don't own them, and whatever he wishes to be done with them in the future, we will maintain that. So I just typed up like just a page, like few lines of what I needed to share with him. And he went over, he was like, yeah, just signed it. And, so some people are just, okay with that. Some people really want to take their time and explore the document and be like, okay, well, I want to change this. Like what you were saying, like this line, it does not fly or whatever. I think it's important to have documentation. It's hard with documentary though, because if you're just out like filming and you're probably never going to go into that location again, then I don't know, like sometimes as a filmmaker myself, I don't really get release forms from people unless like they're absolutely playing a huge role in my film. Then yes, I will talk to them at least and make that either an agreement via email or, just as a paper trail that way. But it's important to not only protect like the work that you're trying to create by having those forms, because like what if you do want to use some stuff and like you didn't get a release form from someone that's saying the story, and I think that's important to have. But I'd love to hear like the way people go about it with not approaching it in that way. Or like just visual cues, like I agree to be in this camera, like on this in this film, sort of thing. People speaking directly to the camera as they're being like before they start their interview or something is another way of doing it without having documents carried around with a bunch of terms that may not be necessary for them to.
It's more because they don't understand the meaning of it, and I'm assuming archiving is kind of in the same vein that they have an idea of what it means, but doesn't. What is in action is kind of different. That's kind of how like that's the thing about release forms. They can become very backfire really quick for the participants or mainly kind of subjects at that point of the documentary. And there's been this conversations around that. I mean, there's a documentary, I haven't seen it, but it's called Subject. It's literally about just that and how they had a lot of them had bad experiences with that. But it also goes into like the larger form of, which is also related to, question for archive is that like they have control of their image. So like, there's one story that was at IDA, their convention they had, this last conference they had this last fall or end of summer or whatever, and they just said like one person said they didn't want to be in it anymore, and so they literally destroyed all the footage of like they didn't like take it out, they didn't do that, but literally wiped it so it doesn't exist anymore. And and I was thinking, like, even thinking about oral history, right? Like, in the sense of, like, creating new forms of oral history, also related to old ones, but like how that, I don't know if there's conversations around that, or people have done that before, like, somebody saying, I don't want to do this anymore, or like coming back to you and saying, this, I don't want to be there, not just take it off like a public source and make it private, but the actual like destruction of the word, of it itself.
TK has a great comment in the chat. TK says, I typically never bring documentation to sign on the first meet. I think that's amazing. Like it makes things so transactional, right? It's like, you've signed on the dotted line, like everything is mine now. My experiences with this have been many and in varied contexts. I've worked with Nickerson Research, which does footage research and clearance for a wide variety of clients, from commercial films to advertisements and documentaries and feature fiction films, and they source a lot of user-generated content. Stuff from YouTube and stuff from Instagram and social media, and so I've reached out to people, and that concept of legal ownership and moral ownership, completely different things. So somebody will say, well, yeah, that's footage of me that my friend shot on my skateboard, and so you have my permission to use it. And we're like, we need your friend's number because they shot it. They technically own the copyright to it. So we have to have your permission to use it, but we can't pay you until your friend tells us we can use it, because that's theirs. They are the creator, you are the subject, and you have certain rights. And if it's going to be used in an advertisement, then you have rights of image likeness. And, like, you have to clear your likeness, but the actual content was created by somebody else. And frankly, the law and the whatever coverage a signed document can give you does not go and never will go nearly as far as morals and ethics require you to. So yeah, like, you may have the legal right to use stuff, but a moral and conscience obligation to destroy it if that's what the subject asks you to, because you have a relationship with them. That comes up all the time in archives work, and often I feel like it's the archivist's responsibility to, like, one-sided responsibility, because the people involved and the communities involved are no longer with us. And so we often are moved to do the right thing, even when we're not legally obliged to, because it implicates our institutions, our organizations, and our ability to have future relationships with people. Like, nobody's going to give you their stuff if you have been high-handed with other contributors. And that's, when I worked for the Japanese American National Museum, they had undertaken a major oral history project that was published, like old school, as transcripts bound in these books and these volumes. And we got funding to digitize those transcripts and make those oral histories available on the internet. We had permission to publish them as books, but we understood in a way that our contributors likely didn't, what it meant to put things online. And so institutionally, our collections department made the decision to contact every single one of those testimonial givers individually, and just say, we have this agreement, a release agreement that covers us for doing this, but we want to make sure you understand that this is going to be out there for everyone. And that was in the late 90s. So people, I think, still didn't really understand, especially older people, who are the kinds of people who are involved in oral histories often. Sometimes there isn't a real understanding, and you can tell when you're talking to them, like, they don't necessarily know. And I think that I've been in a really, like, ethically tough spot a couple of times, and I also have been surprised where at people's tolerances diverging a great deal from my own. So you gotta check yourself before you wreck yourself, I think is the best advice. It pays to ask and be direct and be able to talk about things like death and say, you know, at some point you are not gonna be here anymore. We wanna make sure that like you trust us to do the right thing here. And so being open and forthright is the only way to get there, and even though there could be gray areas. But you're right, like a lot of people just don't want to sign papers. And it's personal, it's really personal. But you also have the right to protect yourself as a filmmaker from legal exposure and liability. So it depends.
Yeah, it's very nuanced situations for sure.
I've put a link to that documentary in the chat for everybody.
Yeah, I think it's out yet.
We'll include that in the resources too.
It's out yet.
It's so timely.
It's on its festival run.
Yeah.
Cool.
Final thought?
Final thoughts of anyone? I guess, yeah, it's just relationships are important. And I think that's what is the basis, the fundamentals of all of this, like collaborative process. And I think just in general, like moving towards a more equitable and just society requires us to be in relationship with one another in very intentional ways. So I think implementing that in our work as archivists, as storytellers, as culture bearers, as historians, super important. And there's ways to do it. And there's small steps that we can take to like move towards like a more just future, I feel. And yeah, this is all very like exciting work for me. I really enjoy doing this stuff. I really enjoy the projects I've been able to nurture through ENTRE, and it's shown me a lot of I mean, being a filmmaker, you always have to be in collaboration, unless like sometimes you work on your own a lot, but it takes a lot of people to make a film, right? Like, so I think there's something to be said about that too, and being intentional with the people you work with in that sense too. But coming into now this new sector of archives and organizing like a place like ENTRE has brought upon new types of relationships for me to explore and really like anchor into like my value system. And I feel like that's the most important thing we can do as people in our society, is just to tap into what we believe in, what makes us want to have like build the world that we wish to live in. And that means treating people the way we'd like to be treated. So I think all of that stems from the work we're trying to do, or the work we're doing stems from all of that work that we're putting into our relationships with one another and the intentional process of all that. So yeah, those are my final thoughts on everything. And I hope this was inspiring for some of you and gave you some resources and ideas. I'll give you all my card if you all ever want to stay in touch with stuff. We can always just talk about things, about anything life and organ and archive related things, relationship building, resources. Happy to be a resource for you all as well. So thanks for coming today, and thank you to everyone in the Zoom room. And we'll be sending out the recording and the resource list. And let me put thank you, TK here. Thanks. Let me see.
Thank you all for being here.
So thank you all for being here. Woo.